To sustain basic organ function, the human body operates under a strict biological mandate. It must maintain an internal core temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. We can observe the extremes of this requirement through a recent clinical case study. A cohort of 6 uncalibrated, under-equipped individuals inserted into a barren subarctic exposure zone. This graph plots the immediate environmental discrepancy they faced. While the ambient temperature plunges below 0 degrees Celsius, the horizontal line representing their required core temperature must remain entirely flat. Any downward deviation from that rigid core temperature line results in systemic organ failure. Because the human body cannot natively adapt to this gap, survival relies entirely on engineering external methods to prevent the environment from balancing the thermal equation. The environment balances that equation by aggressively stripping heat away through 2 primary physical mechanisms. The first is convection, the rapid removal of the body's protective thermal boundary layer by high-velocity wind currents. The second is conduction. This is the direct transfer of physical heat from the body's surface into freezing contact materials like ice and snow. The field data from this cohort reveals 2 feet of standing snow and severe wind chill. These variables act as aggressive downward vectors that drastically accelerate both conductive and convective heat loss. Left unchecked, these overlapping thermodynamic vectors will overwhelm the cohort's basal metabolic heat production in a matter of hours. Their only defense is the immediate construction of engineered microclimates. High-velocity wind shear deflects smoothly over a snow cave's exterior dome, leaving the interior air stagnant to halt convective heat loss. However, sleeping directly on the floor creates a massive conductive heat sink. Thermal energy rapidly drains from the body into the ice. Sleeping here involves severe proximity to ice walls. Even inside a sleeping bag, compressed material against the snow drastically increases conductive contact risks. To survive the night, the cohort had to create a thermal break. By harvesting spruce boughs and laying them on the floor, they engineered an air gap insulation layer between their bodies and the freezing ground. A shelter without a conductive thermal break on the floor only solves half the physics problem. Even if the wind is blocked, direct contact with the ice practically guarantees hypothermia by morning. The cohort's situation deteriorated further due to wet clothing and wet firewood. As seen here, individuals huddle extremely close to a small heat source, desperate for radiative heat to counteract moisture trapped against their skin. Starting a fire in these conditions comes down to the latent heat of vaporization. Thermal energy from a spark gets wasted boiling the moisture out of the wet wood rather than igniting the cellulose. The mechanical solution requires carving feather sticks. Thin wood shavings curl outward from the dry interior of the branch, drastically increasing the surface area to mass ratio. By altering the wood's geometry, a low-energy spark can bypass the moisture threshold and successfully achieve ignition. In the Arctic, fire is a strict thermodynamic engineering problem. It must be manually solved before core temperatures fatally drop. When core temperature is threatened, the body's primary physiological defense is peripheral vasoconstriction. Blood vessels in the extremities violently restrict blood flow to the surface tissue, sacrificing the limbs to protect the vital organs. The field transcript notes one subject's toes turning white and flat. This indicates Frostnip, characterized by acute ischemia and a total loss of capillary refill. Without intervention, it leads to catastrophic tissue death, known as frostbite, resulting in severe, blistered swelling. Aggressively rubbing the affected area or exposing it directly to a fire are common mistakes. These methods physically destroy the fragile, frozen cell walls of the ischemic tissue. This thermal map demonstrates the correct field-expedient intervention the cohort utilized: passive axillary skin-to-skin rewarming. Conductive heat transfers safely from the high-temperature armpit core zone directly into the low-temperature foot. Shutting off blood to the limbs is the body's absolute last-ditch physiological effort to save the internal organs. Reversing it requires immediate, non-destructive heat transfer borrowed from a healthy core. Sustaining basal metabolic increases in sub-zero temperatures demands massive high-fat caloric inputs. Physiologically speaking, eating is heating. The cohort faced extreme metabolic expenditure from manual labor. Trudging through deep snow and operating augers to drill through thick river ice rapidly depleted their stored energy reserves. This flowchart maps the cascading failure loop triggered by combining heavy exertion with a severe caloric deficit. It begins with the initial deficit, leading to shivering exhaustion, followed by a loss of manual dexterity, a subsequent core temperature drop, and finally cognitive decline. Without continuous fuel for shivering and metabolic heat production, all external survival tools, from shelters to firecraft, eventually become physically impossible to operate. Wet clothing acts as a conductive multiplier. It violently accelerates this hypothermia spiral, collapsing the survival timeline from a matter of days down to just hours. Look at these split-screen charts. On the left, a properly prepared expeditionary profile shows high caloric input perfectly matching metabolic output. On the right, the case study reveals massive metabolic output drastically eclipsing near-zero caloric input, resulting in a complete system crash. The intense psychological deterioration and morale failure observed on days 3 and 4 serve as direct clinical indicators of this systemic metabolic crash. Arctic survival is completely indifferent to human endurance or pain tolerance. It is exclusively governed by a strict, unforgiving adherence to the physics of heat transfer and metabolic economics.